Hey, what's up everybody, and welcome to the second part of the paper cutout tutorial. So last week we went over how to create this kind of torn out paper look. So if you haven't seen that episode yet, go check that out. And as promised, this week we're going to be doing the actual animation part of it. Yeah, it's a pretty simple animation. So on top of the animation, we're also going to be adding some little bells and whistles, I guess you could say, to create more realism. We have shadows. We have a little vignetting going on here. And as you can see, we also have just a little bit of chromatic aberration. So I'm going to be showing you how to do that real quickly and easily. And as usual, the files will be available to download so that you can follow along with this project. So now let's get started. Alright, so inside this assets folder, you're going to find everything that you'll need. So importing all these is going to be pretty straightforward and simple. For the waves, we actually have a PNG sequence, and if you're not sure how to import an entire sequence of images, here's how you do it. We can go inside our project window here, and we can right-click, go to Import, a File. Something else we can also do is just double-click inside the window, and we have an import window. Alright, so if you go to the folder where you saved all the assets, if we go to the folder it says Wave Sequence, you'll see that we have all our images here. All we have to do to bring this all in is click on the first one and make sure that PNG sequence is turned on, and also create composition. Now I already have this loaded in here, so once you have these settings and the first one selected, you can just hit open and it will bring everything into kind of like a little video container. Alright, so let's get started by dragging this into a new composition. So we just select it, bring it down to this little icon, and release. So now we're going to set up our scene here. So let's take our waves, and let's just duplicate that. Command D, and we'll call this Waves Front. We'll call this top one Waves Front, and this bottom one will be Waves Mid. All right, so our Waves Front, let's take that and move it down to about there. Now let's take both of them and actually move them down even further to about there. We did this in the first part, but we're going to take our Waves Front, we're going to hit S on the keyboard, and what we want to do is flip this so that they're actually moving in separate directions, opposite directions. So if we open up our scale, turn off the link dimensions, and we'll just put a minus sign in front of that 100. So now they're moving in separate directions. So let's take our Waves Front and duplicate that. Again, Command D, and we'll put this behind our Waves Mid, and we'll call this Waves Back. Oh, if you don't know this trick, by the way, if you want to move something in one direction, you can click on it, start dragging in that direction, and then hold down Shift, and that will only move on one axis, right there. Boom. And we'll put it about there. Maybe take all three, move them down a little bit. I don't know. We want to be about 1/3 up from the bottom. Doesn't need to be perfect. Let's take our waves, move that out of our assets folder. All right, so now let's bring in our sun, and let's put that behind our waves back. And we'll just move it over here, kind of towards the center. Then we can just take our sky, plop that down in there, and our glass bottle. And we'll put that in between the Waves Mid and Waves Back. And just kind of move it wherever. All right, so animation. The good news is that our waves are already done. So really all we have to do is animate our little bottle here and our sun. All right, so let's start off with our glass bottle. First thing we're going to work on is rotation, because I want this thing, if we hit R on the keyboard, we can bring up our rotation, because I want this to kind of be swinging back and forth. Now it doesn't really look right. It doesn't look like it's rotating on a place that would be floating on the ocean. You can see the bottom just kind of swings back and forth. The top swings back and forth. That's because of our anchor point, which is right here. So our anchor point is right in the center of this asset. So what we can do is hit Y on the keyboard, and we can start bringing this down, and then hold down Shift, and we'll bring it to maybe about here. For reference, it's kind of just above this line right here. Okay, I'm going to move that back into place right here. Now when we rotate this, it rotates at a more believable pivot point. All right, so what we're going to do is go to the first frame, and let's set this to something like maybe negative 11. And we'll just click on the stopwatch to create a keyframe. Let's go to about 1 second. And let's turn this up to maybe positive 10. And it will automatically create a keyframe there. So that's cool. Let's go to 2. Maybe bring this to negative 9. I don't know, kind of vary up your numbers a little bit. Bring this over a little bit. And I think I think that should be enough. So let's take this first keyframe here, select it, hit Command C to copy it, and let's go to 4 seconds, and let's just paste that. All right, so let's check out this animation here. It's very stiff and robotic. So what we can do is just we can select all our keyframes here. Right click, go to Keyframe Assistant, and go to Easy Ease. There we go. Now it has more of a sway to it. And you'll also realize that after a while, after this keyframe, it just stops. And we don't want that. So what we can do is just go in here and continue to add keyframes. Or we can add an expression to just do it for us. So we're going to hover over our rotation stopwatch, and we're going to alt-click on that stopwatch, and we're going to type loop with a lowercase l, out with an uppercase O, parentheses, and then from there we're going to type in type equals, and then in quotation marks, cycle. And I like to add a semicolon at the end of the line. Just the force of habit, and we can exit out of that. Again, that's loop with a lowercase l, out with a uppercase O, parentheses, type equals, and in quotations, cycle, and parentheses. Basically, it's telling After Effects, once it reaches this last keyframe, to start the whole sequence again, and to continue cycling through that until you get to the end of the comp. So let's play that back. And it keeps on going. The nice thing about this is that you have less keyframes that you have to worry about. And one thing I'm noticing that it's a little quick. Let's slow it down a little bit. So let's select all our keyframes, hold down Alt, and then click on the last one. And let's just kind of drag that out a little bit. Maybe drag that to 5 seconds. Let's see how that looks. It's a little better. All right, so let's continue on with the animation. All right, so we're going to start here at the first frame. We're going to start right on the right-hand side. So let's hit P on the keyboard to bring up our position. And before we make any keyframes, let's right-click on that and go to Separate Dimensions, or Separate Dimensions. All right, so we have two different axes of movement here. We have side to side on the X, and we have up and down on the Y. All right, so let's get started on the up and down. But we bring our glass bottle down just a little bit, maybe to about there, and let's click on the Y position keyframe. Now let's move up 1 second. And let's bring that up just a little bit. Actually, I want to bring that down more. Oh, that moved both keyframes. One thing to note, if you have multiple keyframes selected, it will move those keyframes in unison, whereas if I only had this keyframe selected, now it's not affecting our second keyframe, which is what I meant to do originally. All right, something like that. And let's go to 2 seconds. Let's bring that down. You know, we can go further than our first keyframe here, slightly. And we can go up to 3 seconds and bring that up. Something like that. And then we can copy that first keyframe and paste it on the 4-second mark. All right, same deal. We can select all our keyframes, right click, go to Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease. There we go. We have some up and down motion. And as with the rotation, it stops after this keyframe. So let's Alt click on that stopwatch. And again, that's loop out, parentheses, type equals, quotations, cycle. All right, so now that will continue to go up and down past these keyframes. All right, so let's select our keyframes, hold down Alt, and maybe shift this again to 5 seconds so it's a little more in sync with our rotation. Maybe not, maybe we want it to be different than our rotation. Yeah, you know what? It looks more natural when it's not in sync with the rotation. Before we move any further, we're going to make these 3D objects, and we're going to move them in 3D space to get that parallax look. If you don't know what parallax is, we actually have an older video, which is one of my favorites. I suggest you go watch that because I think it's a good video. Let's select all our layers. We can select the top one and then shift select to the bottom, and I'll select them all. Or we can hit Command A also as well. That'll select all of them. And what we're going to do is over in this column, we have our little 3D layer button icon. If you don't see this, go down here to toggle switches and modes and just switch that until you see it. So we're just going to click on that last little column there. Now everything is a 3D layer. Now let's start organizing these things. So let's go to where it says one view here and switch that to 2 views, horizontal or vertical, whatever you prefer to work in. And that will create another window and it'll make them side by side. If you did vertical, they'd be on top of each other. Let's start moving these in 3D space. As you can see, all of our layers are right smack dab in the center there. All right, so our waves front, we're going to leave that where it is. Our waves mid, we're going to take this on the Z axis and we're going to move it back just a little bit. Something like this. It's going to disappear because it's now behind our waves back, which we can take that. Move that backwards to about equidistant between these 3 layers. Now that's disappeared because it's gone behind our sky, so we can take our sky and just bring that back. We're going to bring it probably to about here, the end of our black square. And we can move it further if we want, or closer. It's up to you, really. One thing to keep in mind, once we add our light and create a shadow, the further away this is, the bigger the shadow of the bottle will be. Now I have it set in a demo to be about where it is here. Whoop, not there. It's about here. As you can see, the shadow of the bottle is pretty dang big. All right, so anyway, we're going to leave it right there. Now let's take our sun and let's bring that to just about in front of our sky. And then the last but not least, our glass bottle. All right, for our glass bottle, you can take this little movie thingy and move it back, One thing you can also do is hit P and to bring up your position and use the Z position here to move it back if you want. So now we have everything in place, but we got some issues with the backgrounds not quite making it to our borders here. So what we can do, take our sky, hit S to bring up the scale, and just scale that up till it fits. Maybe a little bit bigger. There we go. Sun, let's hit S, scale that up just a little bit. Let's hit S on waves back to bring up our scale. And we're actually going to need to relink these dimensions. There we go. And just bring that forward. Now, as long as you haven't moved the anchor point of these layers, they should just automatically scale up to be the original size and location that you wanted them. All right, waves mid, hit yes, and let's scale that up just a little bit. And do the same with our glass bottle, just a little bit. Maybe a little bit more. There we go. All right, so now we have all of our layers. They are in a nice little three-dimensional space. All right, so let's finish up with our glass bottle here. Let's hit P on the keyboard again. And this time we're going to go to the beginning. And we're going to click on the stopwatch for the X position. And then go to the end. And we're just going to move this over. I'm holding down Shift, and that moves it faster. We're going to go to about maybe here. Because like I said, we're going to be pulling the camera in. So if we bring it to, the left-hand side, it will get cut off by the end of our animation. We don't want that. All right, so these keyframes, we're going to leave as is. It's a linear interpolation. All right, so that's our glass bottle done. Let's go to our sun, and let's hit R. The same thing with the sun. I want to do a little of this, but then we're also going to have it kind of come out from behind the waves and, back into its last position, which will be about here. All right, so let's bring this to maybe -8 at the beginning of our animation here. Click on the Z stopwatch. 1 second, let's go to like +9, -10. Well, not that far. Maybe +7, and let's just copy that first keyframe, paste that in the 4-second mark, select them, easy ease, boom. And once again, Alt-click on the stopwatch, loop. Actually, let's do this. We can double tap U on our glass bottle to bring up everything that is not at default position. And we can just copy our little expression here and just paste that in. So now we have that continuous motion. Now let's see, about 3 seconds is when I want the sun to be up. So we can hit P on the keyboard to bring up our position. And we're not going to separate the dimensions. We're just going to create a keyframe. Then we're going to move to about maybe 1 second. And let's just move our sun down below our water. Let's make this, let's make this a yellow so we can see it a little bit better. All right, so if we select our position, the word position here, you'll notice that we have these 2 dots in the middle of our line, or going along our line. These are actually handles. So we're going to take this one, we're going to bring it straight up, and we're going to take this guy, and we're going to bring it to the left, something like that. And as you can see, it comes to a complete stop suddenly right here, and we don't want that. Now we can select both of these and do the easy ease, but what I'm going to do is just select this last one, right click, and go to easy ease in. And we can even take that even further and click on this little graph editor icon. And we can take this handle and move it over to the left a little bit, and that will increase the easing, so it will come more to a slower stop. All right, let's switch back to one view again. Maybe let's, I keep doing that. Let's click on this again. Let's take our ending keyframe and maybe bring that up to 4 seconds. There we go. Now I think this first, I'm looking at this glass bottle. It's going up a little too high here. What we can do, hit U, go to the keyframes, and that's on the Y position, which is, of course, in between frames. Let's just, if you click and drag and then hold down Shift, I don't know why I said Shift, If you hold down shift, you can snap it to points like this. Anyway, if you hold down shift, you can snap it to points, or you can snap it to, another keyframe. But let's snap it to here so that we can change it. And let's bring that down just a little bit. Maybe let's do this. Let's just select all the keyframes in the Y position. Let's make sure that we're on top of a keyframe here. And we can just kind of bring it down. And this will bring all the keyframes down in a similar way. If you notice, it's kind of added a keyframe right here in X. We can just go ahead and delete that. We don't need it. There we go. I like that better. All right, so that's our animation portion of it. Let's make this thing a little more fancy. What do you say? All right, so let's go up to Layer, New, and create a light. We're going to make this a point light, white in color if you want. Intensity, we're going to leave it 100 for now. We're going to make sure that this is set to cast shadows. That's important. And shadow darkness and diffusion, I have it set to 87 and 10 for some reason. I don't remember why it's set to that, but that's not important because we're going to go back and change that later on. So we can just hit OK. Now you can see that we have our light, but it doesn't seem to be casting any shadows, even though we have it set to cast shadows. Little thing that we have to do. Let's go into our waves front, double tap A, and we have material options here. Let's set this cast shadows to on. So as you can see, we still do not have our shadows showing up. In some cases, it might be that accept shadows and accept lights is turned off, but that's not it, because it's turned on. What we can do is take our point light and move that down. Just move it down. Oh, we got a shadow. All right, so we have our light set up here. And, well, let's just continue on turning on shadows. Boop. Glass bottle, double A. And set that to on. Waves back. Set that to on. Sun, double tap that A. Let's move it to a point where the sun's actually visible. There we go. All right, and our sky, we don't need to worry about casting shadows because there's nothing behind it. All right, so that's all set up, and it looks like Dookie Kong. So let's go to our point light, and let's double tap A on that, and that's because of our shadow darkness and shadow diffusion. Well, let's just turn that down. I'm going to turn it down to about 30%, and I'm going to turn up the diffusion, and this is how soft the shadows are. There we go, something like that. We want a nice soft shadow. And you know what, our intensity, let's bring that up to about maybe 110 we'll try. All right, so that's 120. All right, so now we have our shadows, we got an animation of our glass bottle and our sun and our waves, and everything is nice and dandy, right? So let's add some camera movement. Now to add some camera movement, first thing we got to do is add a camera. So we go to Layer, New, Camera. Now if you set this to 50 millimeters and hit OK, nothing should change. That's a good focal length for us to be using. Now on top of the camera, what I'm also going to add is go to New, or I'm going to right click down here, go to New, Null Object. And we're going to turn that into a 3D object as well. So we're going to take our camera here. We're going to go to this little pick whip. Or we're going to pick whip it to the null. Actually, let's call this camera movement. There we go. All right, let's make this the same color as the camera and make it pink. All right, so with the camera attached to the camera movement, we can actually move this null. Man, my computer is struggling with this right now. And it will move the camera. Move it back to center. And let's see, we'll go to about 1 second here. And let's go back to 2 views. All right, so we got our camera movement. Let's hit P on the keyboard to bring up our position. And make a keyframe at about 1 second. And let's go to 3 seconds here. And let's push the camera in. Pretty good amount right here. Now we're kind of cutting off our sun. I don't want to do that. So let's also move this in the y-axis. Wrong way. Something like that. And to make it a little less robotic, we can right-click on these keyframes and go to Easy Ease as well. And that will ease it right into that animation. Now let's add some bells and whistles to make this fancier looking. All right, so let's take everything. Oh, wait, first, we forgot about our paper texture. Let's just plop that on there and switch over to this little screen. And let's set this to overlay. Now it's a little too much, I think, so let's hit T on the keyboard to bring up transparency or opacity. And let's turn that down to maybe about 50-ish%. All right, so now that we have our paper texture in there now, let's go and select everything and pre-compose that by hitting Shift-Command-C. And move all attributes. So we have this single layer here. What we're going to do is duplicate that, Command-D, twice. All right, so now we have 3 copies of the same thing. So now we have our 3 copies, or 2 copies of the original. All right, so we're going to add an effect called Shift Channels. So that's under Channel, Shift Channels. We're going to add that to the top one. Now you can see we have take red from red, take green from green, and blue from blue. What we're going to be doing here is creating that chromatic aberration look. In case you don't know, it's kind of that color fringing that happens on lenses. So we got a little, you'll sometimes see it when there's a lot of contrast between lights and darks. That's what we're going to be going for. All right, so let's leave this set to red. And for the rest, we're going to turn to full off. There we go. Now we have red. So we're going to take our shift channels and we're going to copy it. We're going to paste it onto the second copy here. And we're going to turn off red and turn on green. Now we can go on to the third one, paste that effect on there, turn off the red, turn on the blue, and watch what happens. We're going to take the top 2 layers and we're going to set this to lighten. And this is what happens. Nothing. You see, if I select these and I turn off the effects, nothing should change. Now, if you did it right, nothing should change. All right, so we're going to take our top one. Let's zoom in a little bit here. We're going to select our top one, make sure that we hit V to bring up our move tool, and we're just going to use the right arrow key. Just pop that over once. Now, it may not look like anything has happened, or much of anything has happened. So now let's go to our second layer and pop that with the left arrow just once. All right, let's turn this to full because we're not really seeing what's happening here. So now we have our chromatic aberration. All right, so for most lenses, chromatic aberration kind of mostly happens on the outer parts of the lens and less so in the middle. Yeah, sometimes, usually. All right, so what we're going to do is let's duplicate this bottom one more time. And let's take off our shift channels. We can just delete that. Now let's take our top 3 with the shift channels on it and let's pre-compose them. And we'll call this shift channels. Let's create a new solid by right-clicking, going to new solid. And it doesn't matter what color we make this. We're going to call this CA for chromatic aberration matte. There we go. Nailed it. And we can just hit enter. So now what we want to do is come over here to our rectangle tool. We can click and hold that down and bring up our ellipse tool. Now from there, we can just double click and let's bring this in just a little bit. So if we grab this little corner here, we can kind of transform this. So if you hit Shift and Command at the same time, it will scale it from the center and evenly on all sides. So let's bring it to about here. Now on top of this, we're going to add a Turbulent Displace. Distort, Turbulent Displace. Let's just pop that right on top of our red square or red oval. And let's bring up the amount just a little bit, maybe the size and complexity. Let's bring that up to 2. Why not? All right, so now let's hit F on the keyboard to bring up our feather options, and let's feather that mask. Kind of like this. Something like that. All right, so let's close this up, and under our Shift Channels composition, let's toggle our switches and modes till we get to this screen. And in this column where it says None under Track Matte, we're going to set this to Alpha Inverted Matte. So wherever this layer shows up, our shift channels will be invisible, or at least inside this alpha, because it's not going to show up anywhere because it's going to be turned off. So we have from the center out, we have the normal footage and then the chromatic aberration on the sides. Easy peasy. Now, like I said, this is kind of subtle and it's kind of meant to be that way. So our next move is to... What are we going to do? We're going to add a vignetting, a little bit of vignetting here. So let's create a new adjustment layer. Let's add a curves. That's under color correction curves. Let's add that to our adjustment. Let's change our adjustment layer to curves, or to vignette rather. All right, so now that we have that on there, our curves on there, let's bring down the whites and maybe darken this up a little bit. So we're actually going to do the same thing that we did for our chromatic aberration matte. In fact, let's just do this. Let's just make this easier and duplicate that by hitting Command D. And we're going to call this Vig Matte. Now let's take our mask here. Let's bring that up so it's around the corners. And let's take a look at what that looks like. Maybe bring up the amount in our Turbulent Displace a little bit. And actually, let's bring that down a little bit. There we go. All right, so we're going to set this again to Alpha Inverted Matte. So now we have our little vignette. And let's add some more contrast to this now too, on top of that. So let's go New, Adjustment Layer, and let's pop on a curves. And let's create just a little bit of an S curve. All right, so now we have some pretty intense lighting. It kind of looks like a cheap kind of can light just pointing at a bunch of pieces of paper, doesn't it? That's what I'm going for. You know, this isn't high quality production here. This is just cutting things out of paper. All right, so now let's name this curves. Yeah, let's do that. So now I want to make this look more like an animation. So what I'm gonna do is add another adjustment layer. And this time we're going to add a Posterize Time. So that is under Time, Posterize Time. Let's slap that on there. Now this says frame rate right up here. Now I want this to be animated in twos. Now what does that mean? It means that each movement is going to take up, well, technically each frame is going to be 2 frames long. And if it's moving in threes, it would be 3 frames, move to the next image. 3 frames, move to the next image. We can do this a couple ways. If you want to move it in twos, you can divide that number 24 by 2, which is 12. And if you want to do threes, you can do 24 divided by 3. And that'll move it to 8 frames per second. As you can see, the frames are moving, but the images are kind of staying still. You know what? I think I want to animate it in threes. We'll do threes. Yeah. All right. So another thing I want to do is actually go back into our Pre-Comp 3, and I want to add some motion blur. So the things that need motion blur will probably be our glass bottle and our sun. Actually, everything. Because we have the camera movement as well. So let's toggle these modes here till we get to this, and this is our motion blur. So we can turn that on. When you turn on these, it'll automatically turn on motion blur for the entire thing. All right, so let's go to maybe about 2 seconds where the sun's coming up. You can see we got a little bit of a motion blur going on. And that'll just add a little bit more realism to this. All right, so let's rename this to Posterize Time. And I think the only other thing that I want to add is our grain overlay. Now I'm going to leave a link in the description to where you can find this at. And I'm going to put it below the Posterize Time. Now this isn't the greatest quality. It's MP4, which not really good for noise with the compression there. But anyway, so this is 4K or UHD, ultra high definition. Let's hit S and set this to 50%. That'll make it 1080 by 1920. Now, all we have to do is set this to overlay. Yep, there we are. And this will add kind of a film grain to our footage. Now it's a little strong. So let's hit T to bring up the opacity. And let's bring that down to about maybe 40%. Might be a little bit hard to notice here, but you might notice there's a line going along our edge. And kind of a magenta line going down this edge. That's actually from our Chromatic Aberration. And if you want to get rid of that, here's an easy thing to do. Let's create a new adjustment layer. And let's add transform. Okay, that's under distort transform. Let's add that on there. And this way we can just scale everything up. Let's just bring that up to 101. And you get rid of those edges. So that's just an easy way to transform everything or scale everything or even move everything at once without having to go into individual layers and stuff like that. Anyway, cool little tip. All right, and with that, that's the end of this episode. All right, if you found that useful or helpful or anything of the sorts, don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button, hit the bell, make sure you get all notifications if you want to. It just helps out the channel. I think we all know that by now. All right, so again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.